This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
Introduction. The storybook A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings by Garcia Marquez is an example of magical realism. This style combines imagination and realism, whereby everyday real-life events are presented with some elements of fantasy, blurring the reader's conceptions of magic and reality. Unlike other literary works such as folk tales, magical realism ends with no apparent moral lessons or truths. Instead, they present vivid magical stories that frustrate and complicate the reader's conception of the meaning of events. This story describes an angel's visitation into a town. The town is not like any other typical town, and the visiting angel is not an ordinary angel. In many aspects, the visitor appears human and natural despite his extraordinary physique. As a result, this visitor contradicts the expectations of the town's inhabitants, and by extension, they are unable to understand the visitor. Their superstitious beliefs and wisdom only drive them to explain the visitor's presence in the town incorrectly. Subsequently, they treat the visitor with cruelty and injustice, which reflects their ignorance. Although the story is subtitled A Tale for Children, the characters and the settings are not ordinary. It is a story where reality and fantasy are split concerning the reader's expectations about the angel's arrival and departure. The major themes in the story. The story describes two important supernatural events, viz. The old man with enormous wings and the girl who turned into a spider. The characters in the story regard the old man as a supernatural oddity who appears frail, and this perception raises an endless debate over his status as an angel. Father Gonzaga believes the old man does not qualify as an angel because he has neither dignity nor splendor. However, the old man displays a supernatural characteristic, incredible patience despite the cruelty of the people. By contrast, the spider girl's status as a spider does not generate much debate. Her status is accepted as the result of her disobedience to her parents. This shows satire whereby straightforward morality stories are accepted as accurate, as exemplified by the spider girl, while frailty and complexity, the old man character, are ridiculed. By using the two supernatural characters, the writer identifies the misperception of the old man in the town, reality, and ridicules society's appreciation of the more straightforward supernatural explanation of the spider girl. The distinction between supernatural and natural is also unclear. Pelayo regards the invasion by angels or crabs as equal nuisances. He sees no distinction between a supernatural oddity, angels, and a natural one, crabs. In fact, Pelayo and Elcienda construct their mansion purposely to keep away angels and crabs. The arrival of the old man is described in vivid detail. His angelic wings were in mud and crippled. At one point, he is described as an old vulture and as a large decrepit hen among chickens. These statements largely blur the boundary between the supernatural and natural phenomena. In this regard, Marquez may be implying that such a distinction is unnecessary, giving rise to different interpretations of the phenomena. The old man is described both as a human and as an animal. For Father Gonzaga, the old man is not an absolute angel as he lacks the dignity expected of angels. By contrast, Pelayo and Elcienda believe he is a sailor. Although the old man bears some human characteristics, the people treat him inhumanely. He is kept in a chicken pen and feeds on chicken mush. By contrast, the spider girl, whose features are far from human, is more appealing to the people because her story is more straightforward and more moralizing. The story starts with strange references to time. The statements on the third day of the rainy season and the world had been unhappy since Tuesday conflate the weather and time in a mythical way. Furthermore, the world appears supernatural rather than absolute. The invasion by crabs and angels appears supernatural. The people respond to the invasions with anger and confusion, especially with regard to the old man. He appears as an angel with prevalent features. In this case, Marquez uses surreal techniques to combine the profane and the holy. Additionally, Marquez combines many natural and supernatural elements in this story. For instance, Paleo and Elisenda, at first, were shocked by the man's appearance but later overcame their surprise and considered him familiar. However, Marquez offers no reason for the sudden change of heart. This technique is common in legendary tales where primarily supernatural events happen with no causal explanation. Marquez uses this technique to balance realistic details and the mythical lack of causal explanation. In this context, the realistic and magical coexist, a phenomenon that blurs the distinction between the two. The author also uses other motifs, such as the angel's language, to combine realism and magic. The angel's dialect resembles that of sailors, however, no one understands him and consequently mistreats him. In other words, they respond to divinity with indifference, which blurs the distinction between realism and magic. Conclusion. The story presents the different human interpretations of supernatural and natural events. The visit by the old man is interpreted in many ways by the characters in the book. They try to interpret the old man in terms of their own lives. The author uses motifs that blur the distinction between realism and magic in the interpretations of the old man and the spider girl. Did you like this magical realism of a very old man with enormous wings by Garcia Marquez sample? To get more works like this one, make sure to check out the free database of academic paper examples at ivypanda.com. You will find thousands of samples for all your study needs, without even having to register.